What is archery? How do you do it? Where do you get your bows? And what do I need to get started? These are some of the questions I get messages about the most often, and today I'm going to try and answer them. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name's David, and I make silly videos on the internet about archery, fantasy, and pole dancing. I'm an archer with over 18 years of experience, specialising in traditional archery styles, and while I certainly don't know everything, I can hopefully give you enough information to get you started on your own archery journey, or at least help you understand the stuff I'm prattling on about in my other videos. This is a massive topic. Archery has been done for tens of thousands of years on multiple different continents, and anything I can say in this video will only barely scratch the surface. But I'm going to try and explain to you what a bow is, discuss some different types of them, and then go into what you need to get started and how to shoot. So I'm going to try not to just stick to one type of archery here, but instead give you a little bit of information from different styles around the world. And if I've not completely lost my voice by the end, I will also talk about where I get my own equipment from. But before all of that gets started, here's a quick word from the sponsors of this video. Remember, sponsors are the reason that I can afford to make these longer videos, so if you've got the time to watch it, I would really appreciate it. Filming these sorts of videos is brilliant fun, but other parts of the job can cause me problems. Because as some of you have probably figured out by now, I'm not especially good at sitting still. So when I'm posting, editing, or answering emails, I tend not to get very far before I get distracted. And yeah, staying in a static position and typing all day isn't necessarily great for you, but shooting arrows all day doesn't necessarily get stuff done. And doing all my editing like this while pacing around isn't necessarily great for me either. Introducing the FlexiSpot E7 Pro, an adjustable height desk that can be used for sitting or standing depending on what you need. Its height ranges from way down at 63 centimeters all the way up to 129, which is easily enough to take any content creator off the top of their screen. So whatever height you work best at, FlexiSpot has you covered. And with a static capacity of almost 3 bloomin' X, you know it's going to be stable regardless of what you put on it. And while I didn't actually check the maximum capacity for moving, it seems to be able to handle 1 bloomin' X absolutely fine. So if, like me, you're not a big fan of sitting still, head to FlexiSpot.com and grab an E7 or an E7 Pro now and work at a height that works for you. Alright, we're back, and the first thing I want to discuss in this video is a bow. What is a bow, how does it work, and what are the parts of it called? A bow is a device for launching arrows, but not everything that launches arrows counts as a bow. For it to be a bow, it needs to have limbs that bend to store kinetic energy, which is transferred through the string into the arrow. If the limbs don't bend and the string is elastic, that's not a bow, that's a slingshot. Even the weirder looking bows like this still have bending limbs that are used to store the energy. The whole thing is basically a pair of levers that are designed to take the energy that we can input with our muscles and turn it into faster movement to launch a small thing at high speed towards something you'd like to make a hole in. And given that I've already started to use terminology about parts of the bow, let's go into that quickly. This is a limb. Most bows have 2 limbs, one on either end, and those are the parts of the bow that bend when I pull the string back and release it. The bit in the middle that you hold is commonly called the riser, or occasionally just the grip, and this bit typically does not bend. Some of these things will have exceptions later, but bear with me for now. This bit is called the string. They are typically made of multiple strands of material, woven or bound or twisted together to create one single, reasonably tough thing that hopefully will not snap on you while you're shooting arrows. Some bows have a cutout on it, like this, which is called an arrow shelf, and this is where your arrow sits when you're planning on shooting it. And some bows will have something on the string around there that is called a knocking point, that is designed to keep your arrow on the string in the right place so that every single time you shoot it, it's in exactly the same position. Because this is a more modern type of bow, it's also got additional fittings for things like sights and weights, and it can also be taken down into multiple pieces for ease of transport. Another element I should mention about bows is their draw weight and their draw length. The draw weight is how much force it would take to pull the string back a certain amount. Usually measured at 28 inches as the standard, that is your draw length. So a 28-inch draw length means that both of my hands are now 28 inches apart from each other. And both of these factors come into play when determining the power of a bow. For instance, this is a relatively easy beginner's bow. It's got a draw weight of 25 pounds at 28 inches. These things are typically measured in pounds because bows are old. But this bow has a longer draw. So while it also has a draw weight of 25 pounds at 28 inches, it can be drawn to 33. So if I were to shoot this thing drawn all the way back, it's going to have more power than this bow, simply because of that extra length, which puts more force into the arrow. The other important bit of kit is the arrow, which also comes in multiple parts. The shaft is the main body of the arrow, then it's also got the point, which is also known as the head, pile, or tip. And then on the other end, you've got fletchings, which are either feathers or bits of plastic or vanes, they are sometimes known as. And then this is the nock, spelled N-O-C-K, which will almost certainly be got wrong by the captions multiple times during the course of this video. This is the bit that sits onto the string, and they also come in different shapes and styles depending on the style of archery that you're doing. The weight, length, number of fletchings, nocking style, rigidity, and style of point will all vary depending on exactly what you're trying to achieve. But unless you're doing something really weird, the front end of the arrow is going to be heavier than the rest of it, giving it a point of balance past the center, which combines with the fletchings and their air resistance at the back to stabilize it in flight and keep it pointing in the right direction. Other things to bear in mind are that the thing we hold the arrows in is called the quiver. This thing is called a glove or a tab. This is a bracer or arm guard. This is a target. This is Zorro, and this is a personal preference that started one summer that became a running joke that I'm now stuck with. Let's have a look at different types of bow. Modern target archery is broadly divided into 3 different types. The first and most common is recurve archery. Technically, recurve covers any type of bow which bends back again on the limbs like this, rather than just being a simple D shape. But for modern target archery, they tend to look something like this. They are often the 3-part takedowns, and they come in a couple of different categories. The first, like this one, is a bare bow. So a bare bow does not have any sights. There's a limit to how many weights and additional things you can add onto it and how big the bow can get. And it is designed to be reasonably traditional while still allowing for modern materials and modern technologies. And then you've got standard recurve or sighted recurve. This involves the use of an additional sight which protrudes from the bow, meaning that you can draw the bow to here, look through the sight directly, and it will be pointing directly at the target for the distance that you've measured. This is a very, very modern style of archery that hasn't existed for all that long, and it allows greater levels of accuracy at the expense of kind of traditional skills and speed. Then on the more technical end of the scale, you have compound bows. These have additional wheels or cams on them, and the string, which is still one piece, loops over those cams and back onto the limbs. So for the limbs only bending a small amount, you can get 3 times as much string. So as I pull the string back, I'm getting less bend in the limbs, they can be a lot stiffer, and they can move back into position much faster. It creates greater arrow speeds, more efficiency for the amount of energy you put into it, and allows therefore higher levels of accuracy, and can be added to basically with whatever you need while still keeping it a bow. And then there's traditional archery, which is a ridiculously broad category covering everything from longbows to horsebows to more or less anything that is pre-1950s in the technologies. The goal of this form is to have simple bows that don't have any of the additional sights and weights, and shoot them in ways that is hopefully vaguely similar to what would have been done in battle or in target shooting over the last few hundreds and thousands of years. And then there's crossbows. I'm not going to talk about these over much because they are largely a different thing. They're governed usually by different regulations and tend not to be used in the same kind of areas. But on a basic level, a crossbow is a bow that has been mounted onto an additional stock and removed more of the potential for human error, but also the potential for human skill and intervention. They are therefore slower, but potentially a lot more reliable and accurate, and can be trained to be used a lot more quickly, hence their historical purpose. They can be useful, they can be good, but they are not really what this video is about. Now, because this is my specialist subject, we're going to go a little bit further into traditional bows. Once again, there are several broad categories. The first is longbows. A longbow is the oldest and potentially most primitive form of bow. It can be anything from a slightly bendy stick with a string added to it to something a little bit more complicated, but it, broadly speaking, follows that simple D shape. It tends to be made out of a single piece of material or layers that are laminated together that run the full length of it in one single piece, and it has that simple characteristic shape. And because of that, as the name suggests, they tend to be a little bit longer than a shorter, more recurved bow. However, just because they're simple doesn't mean that they're not effective, and longbows could be made in a wide range of draw weights, from all the way down at practice levels of around 10 pounds of draw, all the way up to 200 pounds to be used to attack people in heavy armor charging towards you on horses. They were famously employed against France by the English longbowmen, and then again later in other parts of Europe, but they have been used in various forms across all of archery's history, across pretty much every continent you could name, with the exceptions of Antarctica and Australia, where they were only brought relatively recently. There are a couple of terminologies that are used to differentiate different types of longbow. For instance, one that has this kind of a profile could be described as a flat bow, and then a self bow describes a bow that is made out of one single unlaminated piece of wood to differentiate it from bows that are made of different layers laminated together. This kind of brings us on to the term war bow, which is an anachronistic term used to determine bows of above the kind of weight used in target archery and getting into the kind of weight that was used in warfare. Now this is highly variable. A bow of 30 pounds could be used perfectly fine in warfare if your enemies aren't really wearing armor, but if they are, you tend to find heavier and heavier bows used to counter that. This bow has a draw weight of 85 pounds at 28 inches, which gives it quite a lot more punch for sending an arrow down the length of the field, and kind of puts it at that like 80 to 200 pounds of draw weight range that is broadly used to describe war bows. This one sits at closer to 120 pounds at full draw, which means it takes quite a lot more force to pull back, and is one that I don't tend to use quite as often. But just to be awkward, there's another definition of war bow, which is a bow like this. It's a specific type of longbow which doesn't have a bit in the middle that doesn't bend and has a continuous parabolic curve all the way through. These were the sort of more advanced form of longbow that were used for heavier draw weight, but it's not the draw weight as much as the design and style of production that makes it a war bow. But in many parts of the world, the simple longbow technology was improved upon to create the composite bow. Composite recurve bows were characteristically used everywhere from Eastern Europe all the way across Asia and into North America. But there's also evidence of them being brought west into Britain and Western Europe and used in Scotland up until well into the 1600s. Because they were used in so many places, there are different styles and forms that differentiate the Mongolian bows from the Turkish bows, from the Chinese bows, and even those varied depending on time period and purpose. But broadly speaking, they were all called composite bows because they were made of multiple materials laminated together. There would be frequently sinew on one end that would stretch, combined with horn on the back that would compress, and sometimes with a wooden core running through the middle. And that allowed them to achieve the same length of draw for a much shorter bow, and also let them put more complicated curve shapes in, meaning that the bow could return back to straight much more quickly than a longbow. This made them perfect for use on horseback because they wouldn't snag as much and you'd be able to turn without whacking your horse with the bow. And it also gave them much faster arrow speeds for the same amount of draw weight and length. They were typically drawn using your thumb rather than your fingers, but we'll get into that in a sec. Other slightly more unusual styles of bow include the asymmetrical Japanese yumi, which has a shorter bottom limb and a longer top limb, meaning that it could be used while kneeling down or on horseback, while still having the wildly long draw lengths that are used in that style of archery. And then there's also things like the Penobscot bow, which has additional limbs, allowing it to add more power and efficiency without changing the technologies used in making it. But in addition to different types of bow, there are also different types of archery. Archery has been used for warfare and hunting for basically all of its existence, but alongside that, it has also been used as a target sport. But within target archery, you've also got different categories. Olympic-style target archery involves shooting at a static target at a fixed distance at a fixed size on an open field. Or indoors, but it's open. Because the conditions are very controlled, it allows for very high levels of precision and accuracy and is frequently done at distances of up to 70 or even 90 meters. And then there's field archery, which takes place at more varied distances and with different terrain to try and simulate the skills needed for hunting. And then there's clout archery, which involves arcing arrows down onto a distant target. Flight archery, which involves shooting as far as you possibly can. Reenactment, which involves dressing up in historical gear and shooting your mates. Archery tag, which is dressing up in modern gear and shooting your mates. And LARP archery, which is dressing up in fantasy gear and shooting your mates. And then you've got horseback archery, which combines speed, accuracy, and trying not to fall off a horse to replicate some of the skills of the most fearsome archers in history. Warbow archery, which combines precision and technique with being a gym bro to pull back incredibly heavy bows and replicate some of the other skills used by terrifying archers throughout history. Speed shooting, which combines archery with ADHD to produce lots of shots in a short space of time and replicate another form of terrifying archery from history. And then there's whatever the heck it is that I do, which combines several of those elements with being the wrong way up. Because apparently one hobby at a time isn't enough. But hey, I teach workshops, so if you want a book, let me know. Okay, that has all been very technical and historical, but we're going to turn a little bit more practical to discuss how to get started. If you want to do some archery, if you want to get into shooting and you don't know where to begin, this is your guide starting now. And I'm going to caveat this in the way that almost every archer I know of will caveat it, which is saying that you can learn stuff from the internet if you like, but the best way to take up archery, if you possibly can, is to go somewhere and learn from someone in person. This isn't a plug for any of my classes or anything like this. Find a local club or a local archery shop because they frequently have a training range somewhere in there, or if not, they'll be able to point you in the direction of one. Go do their beginner course. They will give you the basics, they will give you the safety, they will probably start you off with equipment so you don't have to buy your own until you've had a go. They may be teaching a style of archery that is not the style that you ultimately want to do, but if you've picked up the basics, the safety, how to shoot, how to aim, and all of that stuff, you can apply that to different styles of archery later on. And that in-person, in-the-moment checking, making sure that everything you do is safe, that you're not going to injure yourself or anyone else, is really, really useful and cannot be replaced by me wittering on the internet. That said, if you've already done that and you're looking to move on to a different style or a different type of shooting, or you're trying to set up for yourself, you don't have anywhere nearby, here are some of my recommendations. Ultimately, all you need to get started in archery is a suitable bow, some suitable arrows, and a safe, suitable place to shoot. Some of which are easier said than done. Bows are relatively straightforward. If you're looking to start some recurve or target archery, or you're just looking for something simple to get going with, I recommend something a little bit like this. This is a Mandarin Duck Windrunner, but a Samick Sage or something similar would be absolutely fine. It's a basic, relatively inexpensive club bow that you can use for shooting at a target archery range, or even potentially up to competitions if you're not wanting to get too fancy. It's got all the fittings that you need if you wanted to progress outside of bare bow into moving with sights or different bits of equipment and some of the more modern stuff before getting a fancy bow. This particular one is rigged at 25 pounds. I wouldn't recommend going above that, and I would very easily recommend going lower than that if you're not confident. The last thing you want to do is start with a bow that is too heavy or not comfortable to pull back. If you cannot easily and comfortably bring the bow to full draw, it is too heavy for you. So start simple. What you want to do is learn to shoot and then get stronger afterwards. There's no point trying to learn to shoot with something that's not going to be suitable. I do have another video when I first got this that was talking about setting it up, but at basic levels, if you get a bow like this, it's not already set up, slapping a little bit of the soft bit of Velcro on the shelf will allow arrows to glide off it more easily, and then measuring directly across to the string, and then going slightly above that, and just tying a little bit of thread onto that will be absolutely fine to give you your knocking point, and that allows you to sit your arrows perfectly level and ready to shoot. For stringing a bow like this, you probably also want a bow stringer, which is usually a length of material which has a pocket at one end and a loop at the other. You put the loop over the top end of the bow, the pocket sits onto the other end, and you can stand on the stringer to take the tension out of the bow and de-string it. It's safe to store, and it's not going to start to stretch the string or bend the limbs. If you don't have a stringer, you can string these using the step-through method, where you put one foot through between the string and the bow itself, push against the base, push your hip into the bow, pull the limb towards you, and place the string onto it. But there's much more risk of twisting the limbs or getting it wrong while doing that, so the stringer is safer. In terms of arrows, I'd recommend just getting basically whatever the simplest and cheapest set of arrows is, because you will go through a lot of them. However, if you are not using some kind of fancy arrow rest, if you're just going off the shelf like this, I highly recommend using feather fletchings, because feather ones will collapse as they push through, so it won't knock the arrow out to the side as you shoot. They also look prettier, I like them more. But the kind of plastic vanes are great if you have a fancier bow, but they're not so good for just shooting off the shelf because they don't compress in the same way. The other thing to bear in mind is handedness. Most people hold their bow in the opposite hand to their dominant hand. I'm left-handed, I hold my bow in my right. There are exceptions to this, I'll discuss that a little bit later. But that means that if you're getting a left-handed bow, it is designed to be held in your right hand. And the shelf on the bow will be fitted in such a way that the arrow goes on the right-hand side. If you're getting a right-handed bow, it will go in your left hand, the shelf will be on the left. These are designed to be shot with Western target recurve shooting style. They are not good for trying to do a thumb draw or an Asiatic style. You would have to get the one for the other hand, but we'll look at that in just a sec. Because if you are interested in traditional styles of shooting, I don't recommend getting a bow like this. I'd rather you get something like this. This bow is from Alibow. It has no shelf setup on it. It is cheap. It is fiberglass. I can chuck it around. It is having zero problems because it's not a fancy bow. But because of that, I can use it for pretty much whatever I like. Now, if you are looking to get a fiberglass bow from Alibow, or even one of their nicer laminated bows, they are not too expensive. They're a pretty good bet. Another good site for getting these kind of more traditional Asiatic styles of bow is mamlukarchery.com. Both of those places also sell arrows, and if you drop them a message to make sure you're getting the right setup arrow for your bow, then they will absolutely help you with that. They're fantastic for traditional styles. Neither of them sponsor me. I wish they did, but they don't. The biggest distinction for a bow like this, aside from the lack of a shelf and the fact that this particular one is very short, is that you have to string them slightly differently. Because this bow curves back in the opposite direction when unstrung, if I were to slap a stringer on it, it just won't work. So we start with the string attached on one limb, sticking out to the other end. I'm going to walk over the way here so you can see. I'm going to brace the bottom limb against my shin, step my other leg through and brace the back of my thigh against the grip of the bow, push my shin forwards, pull the other limb towards me, and then keeping tension on the string the whole time so it doesn't unloop, we loop it around at the top, and we have achieved a strung bow. This gets harder if the bow has more tension in it, but these are very, very light bows and it's very easy. Similar recommendations for these. You're not going to be able to necessarily set up knocking points the same because it doesn't have a shelf. I've wrapped a little bit of tape around the bottom because I use these for training people, so I don't want them getting blisters on their fingers. I don't want to have to worry about finger guards, and I've carefully measured that so that if you were to place the back end of the arrow there, the front end can sit on the knuckle of your thumb, and it's going to sit just slightly angled downwards, so that as it presses over here, it's not pressing too tight into your hand and skipping up when it reaches the fletchings. Again, for arrows, just getting the ones that are designed to be used with these kind of bows is generally pretty good. The sites that sell the bows also sell arrows. These particular ones are actually Kabak arrows from Mamluk Archery, and they are designed for shooting upwards into the air. So I tend to use these ones when I'm shooting in places where I don't have very much range or it's not safe to use lots of power. These kind of fletchings will slow the arrows down mightily. They also make them less accurate. So if you want to do some more accurate target shooting, I recommend getting some accurate target shooting arrows instead. And then you need a safe place to shoot. What this actually constitutes can vary massively, but essentially you need somewhere where you can shoot arrows, and if you miss, whatever happens, it's going to be safe and no one's going to get hurt. The key thing you need for your shooting area to be safe is for there to be absolutely no possibility of the arrow penetrating whatever's behind your target. This is fine, this is ground. There is no way I'm going to shoot an arrow, it's going to go through the ground, out the other side and into a space that I don't have control over. But you can see here, if I were to have a target that is raised up on a platform at around this height here, and all I've got behind it is that wooden fence, that would not be safe, because that fence does not guarantee me that no arrow is going through it, and there is also no guarantee that an arrow going slightly higher than the target isn't going to skip over the fence. That is someone else's house, that is someone else's land. I absolutely don't want to be sending arrows in that direction, partly because it's illegal, but most importantly because I don't want anyone to get hurt. One of the ways you can get around this is by shooting into something. If I set up a target in that doorway there, I know that if I miss, it's going to go into the shed, and it's a metal shed. So long as I'm not using a very heavy bow, it's going to be contained. But an even safer approach is to shoot in a completely contained space. If I shoot at that target there, anything that misses is going to be contained by the fact that there's a dirty great wall on the back of it. Although, the downside of that is that in this space, that's a pretty short distance, and there's a chance that an arrow hitting that wall is going to rebound and hit me, so I might want some eye protection so that anything rebounding isn't going to cause too many problems. It also has the downside that the target's not very far away, so I might want to start aiming at smaller points on it and varying where I aim so that I'm not smacking all my arrows into the same place. The other thing you can do is get something called an arrow net or an arrow curtain, which strings up behind your target and ideally will stop the arrow by cushioning all the force from them and allowing them to drop to the ground. They are absolutely fine if you're using low weight bows or if you're using blunt arrows. What I do not recommend is using a heavier bow with a curtain like that, or just relying solely on the curtain for your safety. There have been times where I've been at an archery range and I've seen arrows fly straight through an arrow curtain, sometimes with enough force to stick in the concrete wall on the other side. So I do not recommend trusting those with somebody's life if you're shooting on a space backing onto somebody else's land. It is much better to have either multiple curtains in a row to give you slightly more safety and then blunting the arrows with a cap on the end, or to have something absolutely solid that you know is not going to get pierced. But while we're in here, let's have a look at targets. This scratty old thing is a bag target. These are my favorite kinds of target because a target needs to do something other than what the backstop is doing. It's not just about stopping the arrow so that nobody else gets hurt. You also ideally want a target where you can see where it's hit, which this is getting pretty bad for, but also you can retrieve your arrows without the arrows getting damaged. A solid concrete wall is absolutely safe, but every time I hit that with an arrow, there's a pretty good chance that arrow is going to smash into itself, it's going to blunt, it's going to smash the tip off, the nock's going to fly off the end, or the shaft itself is going to break, all of which cost me money. This thing is basically just a dirty grey sack filled with lots and lots of fabric smushed together. And you can make one of those for almost nothing. If you can get hold of an animal feed bag or an IKEA bag or something like that, stuff it full of old clothing and fabric or old curtains or something like that, and then bundle it all up, tie it together. That will stop basically anything. There are very few arrows, even from a very heavy bow, that are going to fly all the way out the other side of a big, dense bag full of fabric. On the other end of the scale, you've got things like this, which is just a bunch of layers of foam stuck together. These are relatively cheap to buy. You can often buy them with just little feet that stick on the bottom to prop them up. It's a nice, cheap, cheerful target. There are much, much fancier targets on the market, but starting with something like a bag target for the ease of drawing the arrows from, or something like this, which is slightly harder to get the arrows back out from, but it also holds them more securely in the meantime. Both of these are made by a company called MyBow. I bought them both from merlinarchery.co.uk. Once again, neither of those companies sponsor me, but hey, hit me up if you wanna. And now we come to the most contentious part of the video, which is how to actually shoot arrows. When I was younger, I used to shoot arrows wrong, and then I learned a little bit more, and I learned how to shoot them right, and now I learned a little bit more, and I realized that everyone is shooting them wrong and or right, depending on how you look at it. Archery has been around for so long that there are actually very few ways you can shoot a bow that haven't been done before. And as long as you're not doing it badly, it kind of works, but it won't always work for everything. The specific techniques that have been honed over many, many, many years to be used in modern target archery are generally some of the best techniques for repeatable precision and accuracy. But if you want to shoot at high speed, there are different techniques for that. If you want to shoot particular types of bow in a particular way, there are techniques for that also. But first, let's have a look at some basics. There are a few things that hold true for almost every style of archery, and those generally relate to biomechanics of your body. Ultimately, if you're trying to pull back a bow of any kind of force, pulling it like this is not a good idea. This is putting horrible strain through my wrist, and it's putting all the force into my biceps, which are fine. They can take it on this low-weight bow, but it's not efficient, it's not secure, and it's not stable, and it is more likely to cause me injuries over time. The ideal way to draw a bow, whether you're drawing to your chest, to your forehead for whatever reason, down to your cheek, or if you had a longer arrow all the way back to your ear, is to draw with your elbow, your wrist, and the arrow all in one continuous straight line, like this. It doesn't really matter whether you're using a finger draw, a thumb draw, a Slavic draw, a pinch draw. That line from elbow to wrist to other hand should be straight, with only potential variations in what your knuckles are doing on this hand that can mess that up. This means that I'm putting the force of the draw, the power of the draw, and the weight of it through my shoulders and my back, rather than through my wrists and my biceps. And my shoulders and my back are strong. So if I want to put some weight through them to make a shot that is nice, that is stable, that is easy, it is not going to cause me as many injuries over time. There are obviously caveats and factors to this that might change it, usually based on injuries, Paralympic styles of shooting, things like that. Or if you're doing a weird circus thing where you're shooting your bow, holding it in your foot, you're probably going to use a slightly different technique. But on the whole, that's how we start. Next up, we can have a look at the hand that's holding the bow. Again, there are a few different factors here, but broadly speaking, you want to hold it in a nice loose grip. If you're gripping the thing like your life depends on it, then when that arrow is released, your force and the tension in your wrist is going to flick the bow in a particular direction to try and get it back to this solid gripping point. If you hold it a little bit more relaxed and frequently in a position that is more natural for your body, which often involves it being slightly slanted forwards, it's going to come out of that position. But you can see I'm not really bracing hard against this. And when I release, the bow can kind of fall back into that position. That's nicer. It's more stable. It lets the arrow clear the bow before your wrist does anything to it, allowing it to go more straight. The same is true when you're shooting a bow like this that is a little bit more modern. This one actually is literally built so that I have to hold it in that way, but I still want a nice relaxed grip.
And even though I'm shooting in a slightly different style with this bow, I still want to hit a point where that is nice and relaxed and I'm not putting too much tension through it, even if I do have to kind of keep my fingers on it just to stop it falling out of my hands.
Now we're going to have a look at where to put the arrow. You can, generally speaking, put the arrow either on the side of your thumb or the side of your finger knuckles. And if you are shooting in the modern Olympic style, or with a 3-finger or even a 2-finger draw like this, you're probably going to be wanting to put the arrows on the side of your finger knuckles, like this, and draw back like so. The reason for that is that as I pull this string back with my fingers, I'm naturally going to kind of twist in this direction, and if the arrow is on this side of the bow, there is a reasonably strong tendency for it to get pulled away from the string. However, if it's on this side over here, it will get pulled towards the bow, and it stays nice and safe and secure. There are exceptions to this, usually relating to speed shooting, but we don't need to worry about that right now. However, if you are shooting with a thumb wrapped around the string, that thumb is going to naturally twist the arrow in the other direction. So you want to sit it on the side of your thumb on the bow itself. Because if I wrap my thumb around the string and pull with the arrow on the other side, it will pull it away like that. And if it's here, it will pull it into the bow. So for this kind of a draw, there are lots of different variations, but just to keep it simple, we're going to wrap the thumb just underneath the arrow, take our index finger, wrap that around the thumb itself in a way that pinches the arrow just ever so slightly at the back. Like this, pinch, there. That is holding the arrow in place, and it means that if I were to jump around, turn the bow upside down, something like that, the arrow is held, which is why this is a style that was used by horseback archers. There are some other styles that would involve holding the arrow there. One is a pinch draw, where you just literally pinch the arrow itself rather than anything else. You can do that like this, or you can do it with your knuckle. This is a relatively niche historical draw, but again, you want the arrow on that side because it will push the arrow that way. And then there's the Slavic draw, which is my preferred style, which involves 3 fingers underneath the arrow and then 1 index finger resting lightly against it, which again pushes the pressure in the correct direction to have the arrow on the thumb side of the bow. Once we have established which side of the bow we want to put our arrow, which is less of an issue if you've got an arrow shelf because you're stuck, then we're going to have a look at the actual draw and release. You're going to draw it back using that nice structure which keeps everything in a nice line, engages the muscles in your back. If you feel your front shoulder starting to rise up like this and you can feel it against your cheek, push it back down. We want to keep a nice relaxed shoulder structure. This is a short bow and short arrows. Ideally, I would want to draw to about here, but this is my beginner bow that I use for teaching beginners for faster shooting. Now at this point, you want to find something called an anchor point. Ideally, you want to be drawing to the same point every single time you pull the bow back, so that you're nice and consistent. For me, with this bow, because it's a little bit short and the arrows are a bit short, I'm going to draw back until I can feel the rubber stopper hitting the front of the bow, which means that for me, this part of my thumb is sat just in the curve of my cheekbone. And because that's a nice, easy point to find, I can do that every single time, and I will always shoot in roughly the same way. However, there are a bunch of different styles that you can do if you've got a longer arrow and a longer bow. Some draws involve coming to the chest, like this. Some will take you all the way back to your ear. Some, if you've got a bow that's suitable for it, will take you all the way back to somewhere like that. For modern target archery, you frequently draw to somewhere on your chin, like this. And for certain warbow draws, you don't actually draw to a physical part of your body at all, but you instead pull back until your shoulder blades are touching, and you know that you can't actually pull it back any further. But as long as you're pulling back to the same place each time and you're consistent with it, it doesn't really matter, you're good. The next thing we'll look at very, very briefly is your stance. You generally want to be stood approximately side on to your target so that your upper torso can be side on. This varies also. Some people will stand like this with a little bit of twist in their back, which can add some stability. Some people will stand like this, which allows you to put more strength through the draw. But these are things you can adapt and figure out as you go. The last part of the shot that we want to look at is the release. And the way that this generally works, regardless of which particular draw style you're using, is that you'll pull back to your anchor point and then you'll continue to put tension through. I'm not going to draw here and relax. I'm going to draw to here, continue to pull very slightly. And as I do so, I will relax my fingers so that my hand continues to move in the direction of the draw. What this avoids is a thing where you relax a little bit and then as you release, the string pulls you and your hand comes that way, and that will flick the string in a random direction each time and make it really inaccurate. But if you can continue that little bit of motion each time, then it allows a much smoother shot and it allows much greater accuracy and precision. And that's it. So long as you can get your arrow on the string, you can do something consistent, it's on the right side, your stance is good, you draw back to the same place and you release smoothly, you are sorted. The only thing left is to aim. And the reason I've left aiming to last is because it is arguably the least important part of archery. In some historical schools, they would train blindfolded or without any particular targets and just shooting at like a large blank space for a long period of time before they were ever introduced to the idea of actually aiming at a specific thing. And in other schools, they would start really, really close into a target and they would have to be able to consistently shoot their arrows exactly how they were meant to every single time before they were allowed an actual target face or before they were allowed to take a step back. There are different schools of thought when it comes to aiming, and modern target shooting naturally needs to use sights and things like that to get the ultimate level of precision. But historically speaking, precision at a single distance was not especially useful because you'd be on a horse or your targets would be running or something like that. So you tend to use much more what is called instinctive aiming. And this is something that you need to develop through time and muscle memory. The broad gist of instinctive aiming, however, is that you point at your target. If I wanted to point at that target right now and I just went like this, I could be reasonably confident each time that I'm pointing in that direction because I'm used to pointing at stuff. And so long as I do that with my bow hand, and so long as my rear hand is doing everything that I've taught it to do, then my arrow should go towards the target. There's a little bit more to it than that, but generally it just comes down to adapting over time. If I shoot multiple arrows while just pointing in the direction, and I find that they're all going, say, slightly high, then I just need to point slightly lower, and they'll go towards the middle. This style, we want to keep both our eyes open and allow as much peripheral vision as we can. And we're just going to slowly adjust over time. As you shoot more arrows and you get more consistent, you'll find that the way you're pointing will adjust so that you're going towards the center of the target. And at that point, if you've got the space, you can take a few steps back and you can allow yourself that little bit of extra challenge by shooting from a slightly greater distance. Or if you haven't got the space to step back, you can make a smaller target. At the moment, I was just aiming for that big circle in the middle. But if I couldn't get any further away than this, I might want to start aiming at some of the corners and trying to shoot like that. Naturally, there's a lot more to it than this, and as you get into more complicated things and learn more complicated techniques, there are additional factors such as the khatra, where you flick the bow slightly outwards, or at least allow it to flick slightly outwards as you shoot, different release styles which might involve a more powerful punch towards the end of the shot, adjusting your technique for different distances and body types, and adaptations that you can make for doing sillier things. But this is about getting started, and hopefully that's enough to go off to begin with. And lastly, I promised I would talk about my own equipment, so I'm going to do that very quickly before I leave. These are the bows that I tend to use in my videos. There's a couple of others that crop up, but these are the most common ones. My main bow that I use most is this 85 at 28 inch Turkish style of bow. It's called an Aga, and it is made by MR Bows. This is a similar thing. It's 87 pounds at 30 inches. It's a sort of recurved longbow style. This is by Joe Gibbs Archery. We've got this Mongolian bow, which is by Alibow that I mentioned before. This is also an Alibow. This is an Alibow Junior bow. This is one of the ones that I use for teaching in my pole archery workshops. This is a Mandarin Duck Windrunner, which is 25 pounds. This is 120 at 30 inches or 110 at 28. And this is the H1 heavy draw bow, also by Alibow. I get a lot of my bows from there because they're cheap, cheerful, and good. Again, they don't sponsor me. I wish they did. And then the last thing I get asked about quite a lot is this quiver, which you might see here. It's a somewhat technical quiver that is designed for speed shooting and also not losing your arrows when you go upside down. And it is made by Cosme. It is their side back quiver. I've had two of them over time. One of them broke. I've attached it to the bottom of the other one, so I now can fit 20 arrows instead of 10, which is fantastic for shooting lots and lots of arrows. I really like this. I like back quivers. Side quivers are also fine. However, what I will say is if you are getting a back quiver, this one fastens it around the belt like this. Do not ever get a back quiver that only has one loop that goes over your shoulder like this, because they have a strong tendency to just avoid you when you try and grab arrows from them, which causes problems. Instead, what you want is a quiver that fastens across 3 points like that, because that will stay exactly where it is all the time. I always know where the arrows are, they're not avoiding me, and I'm never going to lose them. All right, that's enough of this. It's cold, it's windy, I've got a lot of editing to do. If you like what you see, please consider checking out things like my Patreon, where you'll also find additional archery tutorial videos and stuff like that. Or alternatively, please consider checking out our sponsors for today, FlexiSpot, because I couldn't make this video if I didn't have sponsors, and they make a really nice desk. But regardless of all that, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for coming, because one of the other things I could not make these videos without is all of you. So thank you all. This is fantastic. I can't believe I'm doing this for a living. So see you around.